Hello everybody, welcome back to another Woodworking Wisdom. Today we're on the router table. Okay, we're going to make a really nice little pen rest or desk tidy, I guess you'd call it. A really simple little project. It's a great way to get you kind of started on the router table if you've just got one. It's a nice way of starting to use the fences, looking at cutter height and things like that, and a really simple project. Let's have a little bit of a closer look. So this is similar to what we're going to make today. It's just a piece of timber, and we've routed some grooves in it, and then you can put your pens and things in there on your desk. Okay. We got a couple of other little bits that we're going to do as well, but like I say, a really simple functional object, and we've actually got quite a pretty piece of wood. We've got a piece of tulip again, but it's got some really nice colouring going through it. We've got some kind of greys and yellows, some pink in there, and once we've routed that and put a bit of oil on it, it's going to come up really nice. Okay, so like I say, we're going to be using the router table. I've already set the router. We've got a little kind of round cutter in the table, in the router. So 1/4 inch shank on this, and it's just held underneath in the router. Okay, so first job we want to do, we want to kind of set the height of the cutter. I'm going to use this depth gauge here. We can drop that down onto the router table, and then we've got we can set our height from here. Now either you have a router elevator or some sort of plunge or kind of fixed base under the table to allow you to adjust the height of the cutter, and that's what we're doing here. I've just set that to 5mm, and I'm going to lock the router in place. Okay, so let's have a little bit of setup. So this is the board that we're going to route. Okay, and we want this round over to kind of come in just on the edge here, so we can set the fence of the table until this round over here is just aligning almost to the edge of the board. Okay, and that's going to give us this little scallop running through here, this first one. Okay, we've got a couple of different shapes here, so we'll do some cutter change as well. Now this is almost an enclosed cut, because as we're passing over the top here, there's nowhere for the shavings to go back into the extractor, so I've left a slight opening on this little insert ring here. Usually we would bring that ring in nice and close to the cutter, so we would perhaps have a smaller size on the hole, but for this one, just to help with some of that extraction, we've left it just slightly open. Okay, so I'm going to use my first one as a setup piece, so we can bring our fence into the right position straight off the bat. Okay, like I say, first one you do, it might be worth using a scrap piece of timber, so that you can align this little channel that we're going to cut along with the edge of the board, and I've just left a slight a slight lip on the edge there. So I would always recommend using a practice piece first, a scrap piece of timber. Just run it along on that first cut and make sure your fence is in that right position. And if you've already done one, it's great, you can use it as a setup to space the fence, get it exactly where you want that cutter. Okay, now we have an exposed cutter there, so I'm going to use this little guard. We've got a little feather kind of bubble guard that's going to go over the top there, and the way that's going to work, you can see these fingers coming this direction. So as the workpiece passes under, it's almost like an anti-kickback, so we're not going to travel that way. You know, the piece of timber is not going to go back that way. We're going to pop our piece of timber in underneath. And it's important to see that this router is isolated. So it's not switched on, it's not even plugged in. Okay, this is where we're going to plug it in on the MVR switch here. But it's not plugged in while we're looking at changing where the fence sits, when we're putting that guarding in place, or we're checking the height. So make sure there's no power going to the router. You know, it is quite a difficult thing to switch on by accident, but you know, accidents always happen. So just, you know, use caution. Now, I've put a little bit of pressure down on this top of this guard, just to flex those fingers a little bit. I can see them move. And what we want to be able to do is to pull our piece of timber through, and it just holds it down. But it's not going to be too hard to, you know, push the piece of material through. So that's our bit of wood, and I think we've got a little bit more colour this side. If you see how wide that band is there, it's wider. We've got the white, more of the white timber coming in. So let's use this side, and of course when we're routing on the table, the piece that we're machining is going to be face down. I think I'm going to start on this kind of darker side. So let me grab my goggles. Sorry, I always do this. It's a nightmare for putting my goggles down in places and then not remembering where they are. Okay, so really important, we've got eye protection at the very least. And this can be quite messy. It's going to throw dust either side of the cut. So something like an air filter on one side of the bench could be really useful. We are using extraction, but like I said before, where the cutter is going to sit in one of these, it's kind of like a closed cut, so the extraction ports aren't pulling away all of the dust. Okay, so I've already set the speed and the depth on the cutter. We're going to show you that on the next cut. But for now, let's just push this piece of timber through and make sure everything's working nicely. So I'm going to plug the router in. I finished doing all my checks and all my, make sure everything's nice and tight. That nothing's going to kind of move when we start to use the table. Okay. So plug the router in. Make sure I always just peek under the table here. Make sure that the router's locked in place. Give it a little wiggle. Make sure everything feels nice and firm, and we're not going to get any surprises. Either you'll turn your router on and a switch under the table. We've got it hooked up to an MVR switch here. So router's going on, extraction's on, and I'm going to use this little jig. Really easy jig to make. It's literally just a little hook with a couple of handles on it. Okay. So just going to push this through on that first cut. Turn the router off. And we're also turning the extractor off there. And you can see if we go to this overhead that it's kind of ejected a load of material this way. They're quite a it's not like really fine dust, so it's not actually, I can't smell it yet, it's not airborne. A little bit of sanding and that's going to come up really nice, that finish. So we've basically got a little channel. Not sure if we can see that really, but we've got a little channel running up through here, and I've just given myself a little flat spot along the top so that this kind of lip is not too weak, and it's not going to just break off. Let's come up a little bit closer to camera there. So I've got a little flat spot on the end here. Okay, good. So the next bit, I'm going to, I think let's use this one as our setup piece again. Obviously you can take the measurement of the diameter of the cutters, and we can lay these out on the underside of the board if you wanted more of a clear idea of where the cutter's going to be. I think I'm going to use this one as my my setup board, or maybe even this one, because we've got a kind of set up with this. I've put some little magnets in this. Just going to pick them up. They've fallen through our guide holes. So I've made another one here, just as a slightly different shape. And actually, I think let's go with this shape for today. We've got two of the half rounds, and then we've got two of the wider scoops, which we'll do in a minute. I think I was thinking we could use the other as a setup block, but it's actually a slightly different layout. So let's go with this one. This is the one we're going to make today. So let's isolate the router. So literally pulling the plug out of the socket, we can move our fence back. So we're going to cut in a different position now. You can leave the bubble guard as is. But what we want to do, actually, let's pull it out of the way so we've got a better idea of where we're kind of looking. You can either just align the workpiece. Remember, we've isolated that router, so it's not plugged in. I'm going to use the end of the eraser on a pencil just to turn that cutter around. I wouldn't use anything metal. We've got a tungsten cutters on that. And I'm just eyeballing it down the side of the fence. So I'm looking down this way, okay? And I'm checking it against that groove here, and it's going to kind of sit parallel to that groove. And we can lock the fence. Reset our guarding or little fingerboard. So there's not quite enough pressure down on that yet. So I'm loosening one of those, pushing down, tighten it back up. So again, that's working as a slight anti-kickback, but also is putting a bit of pressure down, stopping the project from lifting as we're traveling across it. Good. So our second cut. Plug the router back in. Make sure everything's locked off, everything that we've kind of adjusted or fiddled with. We need to just double check them. Looks good. So let's do our second pass or our second cut. Extractor on. And passing right the way through from right to left. Always do that on the router table. It's really important to know which way the cutter is travelling, so we can go against the rotation of the cut. A nice little trick I saw the other day. If you have a cutter in the table, it's like a thumbs up. Okay, so if you imagine the cutter in the router table, so the cutter's facing upwards, the rotation is going anti-clockwise. Okay, and likewise, if you've got it in the in a router, so that the cutter's facing down, the rotation would be clockwise. Okay, so it's right to left on the table, left to right if you're freehand routing. Okay, so we've got two nice little grooves in there. That's the beginnings of our kind of little rests. So we can put our pens and pencils in there. Now I want to go to a slightly wider cutter. Okay, so we're going to use this dish carving cutter. Really nice bit to use. It's got that kind of flat bottom to it. Okay, and it's like a milling cutter as well, so it cuts on end. All right, for creating bowl shapes and dishes, as the name kind of suggests. Now let's have a look. So we want to change our cutter. So again, disconnect the router, totally isolate the router. I'm going to release it from the bottom of the table, and you know, you'll have different routers at home. Sometimes you could come in from the top here, so you might need to take the fence back and remove your insert ring to change the cutter. There's lots of different ways different routers work. I'm just going to put it in this plunge base to change the cutter here. So let's find its lock on the spindle. So we've got a little pin here. We need to just rotate this until it locks, and then you can undo that collet. It will turn a little bit until you need to get the spanner back in there again. That's a little safety feature. So just undo that one. We're done with that, and just remove that cutter. Remember, this router is isolated, it's not plugged in. Really, really important, especially if you've got something like one of those rocker switches on the underside. We can't have this coming to life in your hands. So, dish cutter. Let's have a little peek at this before we get going. Maybe hard to see on camera here, but we have, yeah, it's not really picking up because we've got a bit of glare. We've got a K-line here on the shaft of the cutter. You know, if you've got these at home, you know, make sure that you're looking at this information. It's very important. You'll have a K-line and a kind of the top speed. And let's have a peek at this one. This is around, where are we there? 18,000 as a max speed on that cutter. Okay, let's check our router. So on our router we've got 10,000 to 25,000 RPM. So I'm just going to bring that from top speed we had on that smaller diameter cutter. I'm just going to drop it down to 4 on the dial, and that's around about our 18,000. Cutter goes in up to that K line, and we'll just tighten up that collet nut. Get that spindle lock engaged again. And we find people really kind of over tighten the routers. We can get it tight, or kind of finger tight if you will, and then we're just going to take that a little bit more. We don't need to keep going until that, you know, it's really really grabbed in there. So we're up to our K line. We've got our cutter set. It's locked in there. Now we just need to take the router back out of our base. Okay, so I just dinged it on the table there. I'm just checking that that bit of tungsten looks absolutely fine. So just be careful as you're handling these. That tungsten is a little bit brittle. Right, let's get rid of our base here, and again we need to set the height of the cutter. So again, a couple of ways you could do this. If you've already made one of these, it's nice and easy. You can use your kind of previous setup, but something like this is really useful. I'm just going to bring that fence forward so that cutter engages on there. We've got our 5mm set from the previous cutter, so let's just bring that up into a rough position. Let's drop it down one from there, and then we can rise up with your elevator or however you got your router table set up. So I've come up a bit too far. I lock that off at 5mm, so I just need these feet of our depth gauge there to sit nicely on our table inset. That looks good. We're at our 5mm. Okay, so I'm going to use my my last one as a setup, but we can do it just the same way as we did before. We can align the cutter. Remember, we're isolated, really important. Oh, that's my kind of mantra while we're working on the router table. Using my pencil eraser just to rotate that cutter so we've got the full kind of width of the cutter. Because the body of it, if it's off at an angle, it will give you a kind of a false reading. So we can bring our workpiece there, and just again we're looking down this line and making sure that this cutter is going to kind of cut in parallel to our previous cut. Locking off. Okay, so I've locked off the fence, and like I was saying before, if you've already got a workpiece that you've done, you can just use that one as a quick reference. You can literally put it on top of the cutter, bring your fence forward, set your height off of your previous workpiece. Okay, so fairly happy with that. Bring in our guarding again. Going to drop that down here. Just relieve that one a bit. Feels a little bit stiff on the kind of being able to pass that through. So I'm just going to release that fence a little bit. Now it should sort of ping under the fingers. Again, it still feels a little bit tough, so just going to release that one. Good. Okay, so again, make sure, double check everything's locked. Router's locked under the table, and then we can plug it in. Okay, I need my little jig. Something like this is really useful if you're doing a lot of routing. It just brings your hands back that further. We don't really want to be coming in that close to a cutter and feeding that through with this size of material. So a little jig like that can really help and keep things nice and safe. Okay, so I'm going to turn the router on. You just check everything's good in here, and you can hear that the speed's gone down slightly because we've got that bigger diameter cutter. Okay, so that's giving us our next groove. Again, wait for everything to kind of wind down and stop before we're going to make our next cut. A few more adjustments to make with the fence. And we're not far off. So again, we're bringing the whole fence assembly forward. Just trying to get rid of any debris that may be sitting along the back of the fence here. You know, and potentially spacing our workpiece off there. So, again, use your pencil eraser, rotate that cutter till it's in the right position, and I'm eyeballing it down this way. Good. So we can lock that off. Always like to double check what I'm doing, especially on these live ones or these pre-recorded videos. So what am I doing here? That needs to sit over our cutter and a little bit of downwards pressure. Where you can't get the board right up against there because the cutter's in the way, we can just put it on a skew like this, so we've got plenty of these fingers kind of engaged. Push down, gentle downwards pressure, and then tighten off. Good. Might just slacken off slightly on this edge. Again, we don't want to kind of struggle to push it through. Okay, cool. So that's it. Remember, we're doing our double checks. I've adjusted this and this, so they're the ones I'm checking. We haven't touched anything on the back, and I checked that before we got going. The key with routing and safety is to check, check, and check again. Okay, so router's back in. Again, just getting rid of any kind of debris on the table in case there was some muck here and it starts to twist the project as we travel right the way across. So, router back on, extraction, and this is our final pass across the top. Good. So I may have come a little bit too close on that last one, but a little bit of abrasive across the top there is just going to soften that edge and give it that kind of a bit more strength. Okay, that's probably a little bit vulnerable as it is. So I would take a bit of abrasive and just run it along that top edge so it's not sharp, and with it being a bit blunter and a bit wider, it's going to have a little bit more strength. Good. And I would sand along here. If you sometimes with these kind of closed cuts, the kind of dust gets in the way a little bit. So sometimes these side faces might just need a little bit of a dressing with a bit of abrasive, but it should knock off really quickly. You know, this one's really nice and clean on that face and that one. So that dish cutter is giving us a better kind of all-round cut. So there's not much to clean up on these two, but there was a little bit just along these faces here, which we can just sand off. Not too much work. Okay, so we've got these lovely colours coming through. I'm not sure if we can really, if they're picking up on camera. It's like when you take a photo of the sunset and it never looks quite the same. But there's some really nice colours flowing through this. We've got kind of a pink, some kind of greys and yellows. It's a really pretty piece of timber. Okay, so one last thing I just want to do. I make lots of pens. I'll turn lots of pens, and quite often we get metal bushings and things like that. And there's lots of little parts to these pens. So I'm kind of using mine as a kind of little layout bit for pen assembly, so you know where you got your cap ends and bits and bobs, all the twist mechanism in these little bits here. And I'm just going to pop a couple of magnets up on top here, and then a place to put your bushings or things. Quite often when we're making pens and we're making a mess, all those little metal bits kind of get scattered around, or they fall in the shavings or something like that. So I'm just going to apply a couple of magnets onto mine. There are other things you could do on the router. On this one, look, we've put a little round over. So let's come back on our camera 3 here. We've put just a little round over. You could bring it to a certain point and stop by putting stops on the fence, and that will give you little feet. So there's all sorts of things you could do to the kind of bottom side of this to make it look a little bit prettier. I quite like this this kind of clean, hard edge on mine, so I'm sticking with that. But of course, that would just be using a little round over cutter, bearing guided, and that would just sit on there in the table, and you would pass it with these channels facing up. And that's where it's going to give you that little round over. Okay. Right then, let's pop a couple of magnets in here. So I've got these rare earth magnets. Let's go back on here. These are really strong little things. I can't just about get them apart. These are rare earth magnets. These are 8mm by I think it's 5mm. So these are really strong magnets. Oh, and they just ping away. I caught them, don't worry. So I'm going to put them to one side. In fact, I'm going to stick them onto our cast iron table on the router. Then it's not going to travel away anywhere. Just have a quick little tidy up. And where's our project? I've put it on the pillar drill already. So I've got the pillar drill here. What I'm doing, you can't quite see it on camera, but just around here we've got a couple of lock nuts that will go up and down with the quill, or the the bit on here. Sorry about that, camera just popped off for a second. So you can set the depth of the pillar drill, and what I've done is I've set the drill bit around about 5mm into our project, and that's going to be the width of that little magnet. Okay, and you could put them all the way along the back if you wanted to. You could flip this over and recess them so they're hidden in the back. That magnetism's so strong it will travel through the wood a little bit. I would just go a little bit deeper so they're closer to the surface. I quite like them on show. I think it makes it a bit more obvious what they are, what their function is. So we're going to, a bit like we did on the router table, we're going to set the fence on our drill. I'm going to put on a rough little kind of centre line. Let's come back onto camera 3 here. I'm just using the tip of my finger and the kind of edge of the board to give us a rough centre line on that. I've got a little flat across the back here. This is a lip and spur type drill bit. I think we're just about going to get that on that flat. I would have liked a little bit more room on there. So bringing the fence up too. It doesn't have to be parallel and straight, a bit like the router fence. As we move this piece of timber along, because we've got that caught on that centre point, that centre line, as we move it along, that's just going to run parallel to the fence. So it's always going to be on centre, no matter how many drill holes we drill. So my little kind of brad point on the drill bit is hitting that centre line. I've brought the fence up to the project, and then I'm just locking off here and here, trying to keep that engaged for now so it doesn't wander, and then we can let that go once the fence is kind of locked in position, and then really do that up, double check, we're still on centre, which we are, so we're all good. You can extract from this pillar drill as well. It's got an extraction port on this fence and on this UJK table, which is really useful. I'm only really cutting 2 little holes, so I'm not extracting from this today, and that's why the fence is just covering that extraction port. Really close to that back edge here. So like I said before, I would have liked to give myself a bit more of a flat spot there. And I'm just going to just slightly readjust that. Just one side of the fence so we don't kind of break out the back. We were lucky with that first one. Just a slight fraction. Again, we want to make sure there's nothing set up against the back of the fence, spacing our workpiece off of it. So nice and gentle with the kind of plunge on this, and that's gone down to my lock nuts and kind of stopped and cut 2 little holes at a 5mm depth. Okay, and then we need our magnets, the trusty magnets. These will probably pop out and grab each other as they are, but a little spot of glue in there. Let's try and get these things apart again. Oh god, they're really strong, so bear with me just a moment. I should have done them individually. There we go, we got them. So they can just sit in those little recesses. I'm going to hold that one down as I apply the other one. And then we've got a little kind of magnetic area on our desk tidy. And like I say, I would use that for my pen bushings. But you could use, you could put your paper clips on there, you know, as part of the desk tidy. You could extend this out the back and maybe put some drill holes at a slight angle so you could stand your favourite pens up in the back there. So a few little ideas. A nice, simple, functional project, and really quick and easy to knock these out. You know, we've just done one there, probably about half an hour if I wasn't waffling on so much. I know there's a temptation, if you wanted to do something like this, to do it in long lengths. And I think you would probably be able to do 2 in length and then cut it through the middle. But don't do them, you know, any longer than that, because they're, like I say, that contained cut is going to throw out a lot of waste, and it's going to start to affect the cut the more you kind of come along and use that. So you could do them 2 by 2, but I wouldn't go 3 or 4, or I certainly wouldn't pass a long plank through and expect it to cut all the way along. But that's about it for today. So like I say, a nice little simple project. These are really kind of quick and easy to knock out. So if you wanted to, you know, start making a little bit of money at the craft fairs, things like that, you can personalize these. Of course, we're using timber, so we can put pyro on them. We could put pens, or where we've got our magnets at the back, we could label that paper clips. You can recess magnets in underneath and change different styles. Like before, the first one I did, let's come back on camera 3 here, that has 2 wide channels in the middle, and then the kind of with the dish cutter, and then that round nose cutter did the ones on the side, so it's got that nice kind of symmetry to it. Okay, and then this one is a little bit different. We've got our 2 round nose cuts, and then we've got our 2 larger ones at the back with the dish cutter. Okay, so thanks very much for joining us today. Stay tuned. We've got lots of interesting demos coming up. Always with the suggestions. We really like to hear your suggestions and find out what it is that you guys want to know, or if there's any particular projects or finishes, anything kind of that comes under the woodworking umbrella. Please put your suggestions in the comments or send us an email on our woodworking wisdom, all one word, at axminstertools.com. And that's about it. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.